Right. Here with Joe Pecorelli.
Well, I'm really glad I'm here.
What was it that you wanted to get from the conference, and what is it, like, the key message that you want to send to people? Derek Evans from AFBI, Agro-Food and Biosciences Institute.
I'm delighted to be here. Thanks very much, Jack, for inviting me. What a fantastic start to the morning. I'm going to be focusing on citizen science and how we engage volunteers in our eel programme in the Thames. I'm from the Zoological Society of London. And I think it's going to repeat a lot of the good work that you've been talking about, Jack. Let's see how we go. But just to set the scene, so the Zoological Society of London, we're nearly 200 years old. We've got 3 strategic areas: wildlife and people, wildlife health, wildlife back from the brink. And so our eel programme, we're quite eel heavy. Our eel programme kind of really fits with that wildlife and people, which is the citizen science, the community science stuff that I'm going to be talking about, and the wildlife back from the brink, because of course they're critically endangered. We all know that now, if we didn't before. And the sort of 3 main areas that we operate in within ZSL is we've got sort of a lead on international policy, who's a fellow countryman of yours, Matt Gollock, and he did the initial IUCN Red List assessments for eel, and they've just redone them, and those data are just about to come out shortly, I believe, in a month or so. We've got a research department led by a chap called Adam Piper. Dr. Adam Piper does a lot of work with the Environment Agency in England, looking specifically about the impacts of man-made structures and how to mitigate them. And then we have the conservation project within the Thames. So that's about direct delivery. That's the kind of welly boots on the ground type stuff that Jack talked about. Our version of it in the Thames, which I can see from your slides, is a very different landscape, and we've applied slightly different principles, but slightly different practice, but the same sort of principles at play. So these are the sort of 3 strategic aims of our work in the Thames. It's to provide evidence to inform conservation priorities, to reconnect migratory pathways, so that the stuff you were talking about, all those barriers. We've just in the Thames River Basin alone, there's over 2,000 structures, and not all of them have been assessed as to their impact on upstream migrating eel. And the other element of the work that we do is really to try and engage stakeholders in work for eel. And one of the principal mechanisms we use to do that is citizen science. So engaging communities and the organisations that they may represent, and bringing them together within the eel management plan, the snappily titled Eel Management Plan Implementation Group. And these MPEGs, as the acronym goes, were set up to deliver the eel management plans that Jack and Andrew mentioned, that were instigated by the EU eel regulations. I think we're one of the few still active eel management plan implementation groups in England. So let's start with the evidence side of things. It is very difficult, as we've already heard this morning, to get evidence on where your sort of yellow eel stocks are in rivers. They are very difficult to monitor. So we've got the main source of our data is Environment Agency data, so electric fishing surveys. Basic electric fishing surveys, eels don't respond that well to them, so but they do. You do catch them, and if we compare catches over time in the Thames, you can see where the black dots were where we used to find eel. And over the last 40 years, the distribution of eel has receded down to a sort of core area. Whether that's to do with barriers or lack of recruitment, we're not 100% sure. But our programme, our long-term programme, so 2005 we started, is to try to get to grips with what the principals issues are within the Thames. And that's why if you're setting up a program like this, you've got to be in it for the long term. It has to be the long term. Another method that we have to look at our yellow eel stocks is good old-fashioned Bikenetting. So we've got 10 sites along the Thames that were fished in, they were actually fished in 1987, they were fished in 2011, and they were fished just a couple of years ago. So the idea is repeat this survey to allow us to get a handle on our resident population of yellow eels, so this grow out phase of eels within the Thames. So this is part of our evidence gathering strategy. It doesn't particularly involve citizen science, so I'm not going to dwell on it, and neither does the electric fishing. Problems begin. Yeah, do the old-fashioned pressy button. Okay, so this is what I want to be talking about for the bulk of the next few minutes. It's our monitoring the upstream eel migration, so gauging recruitment. This is where we really work with our citizen scientists. We've been doing this monitoring the upstream migration since 2005, and it's only in the last 11 years or so that we've started to work with communities through citizen science. And we've got different functions for different sites. So we've got 3 sites within the Thames River Basin District, on the Medway, the Roding in East London, and the Thames near Hampton Court Palace at Molesey. These sites have been monitored for the long term, so between 12 and 17 years in the case of the Roding. And that's really key. Long-term data is essential to allow us to understand trends in recruitment, so the numbers of young joining the adult population. So that's one aspect of the programme. The other sites, so we've had up to 24 sites, the maximum number of sites in any one year has been 15, is generally to try and understand the impact of barriers and the local problems related to recruitment in eel. And just to sort of touch on the question that Paul asked about the timing of the migration, very similar to what you're seeing up here. I presume there's an East Coast, West Coast kind of split. So we're East Coast, we see eels starting to migrate. In fact, it's pretty uniform each year. The first site furthest east on the Medway, about the 15th of April, the little cheer goes out from the citizen scientists out there. And then we track them going from east to west across our rivers. And you can kind of every year, it's pretty standard, and it's based on water temperature increasing. That's the basic environmental parameter that spurs the. Thank you very much. The recruitment. Oh, funny slide thing going on. Yeah. So as I said, we started 2005 on the Roding with the core of our programme being based on monitoring, and in 2011. We wanted to upsize it, we wanted to scale up, and so we started to recruit citizen science volunteers. And yeah, so as I said, every year the timing is the same now. So March we start to put the word out that we need volunteers, and remarkably we get about 120 people a year join us, give or take, depending on the number of sites. I appreciate, again, it's a lot easier. We're surrounded by millions of people in London, so we're still getting a tiny fraction of them. The target is to get them all eventually, but a small proportion of them join us, and a few of them become incredible eel enthusiasts, and we'll talk about that shortly. But the basic structure of the programme, which is delivered collaboratively with the Environment Agency locally, is that there's three organisations involved in any one trapping site. So there's us, there's the Zoological Society of London. We set the protocols, the monitoring protocols. We generally build the traps, and we provide the training and equipment and the data processing. So all the data just comes into our website. We check it, clean it, and then report back at the end of the season. We have a site partner, that might be an NGO, a Rivers Trust, whoever, and they recruit with us the volunteers, they coordinate the monitoring. The monitoring frequency is based on welfare, so minimum of 2 checks per week, and I'll talk about the sort of welfare issues shortly. And then the third partner in this is the Environment Agency, of course, and they work with us on the sort of strategic priorities. So in other words, which sites do we want to learn more about? Which catchments do we want to investigate? In a sort of nutshell, the basic priorities is to start low down within a catchment to get your recruitment, and then start to move up. That's the idea. So these are the sorts of traps we use, and I completely concur with what Jack was saying, that low tech is best, and really we're sort of behind the curve on that. In the past we've used, so these are all schematics of the traps with images of them. The initial traps were based on, there were some researchers a guy called Ian Naismith did his PhD in the Thames in the 80s, fantastically. It was very fortuitous. No one was particularly interested in eel in the 80s, other than fishermen getting annoyed with them. They set traps in particular rivers within the Thames River Basin, and that allowed us to replicate that study. So use their same sites and their same trapping methods, which you can see here. All things available from B&Q, essentially. So low-tech, but perhaps not as low-tech as yours, Jack. And they come with their own problems, these traps. You know, rivers are obviously dynamic places. They get buffeted around, and sometimes we have to reassemble them. So those are the initial traps. The trapping areas, as I say, were repeated from a study in the 1980s, and that gave us direct comparison. In 2011, we published the data from this trapping project, and it showed a 99% drop in recruitment at the sites that we were trapping at that time. So data from 2005 to 2011 show a shocking stat, and you know, many shocking stats that we're going to see today related to eel populations. Since then, we've sort of diversified the trapping methods. We essentially now try to put traps in eel passes, so that's the second one down. This is one of our main sites at Molesey in the middle there. Nice robust pass with a trap in it, essentially, and it's like a metal fyke net, if you know what a fyke net is. Other sites, we have used pumps in the past, but I'm going to stop talking about them in the future. We don't recommend them. They are very problematic. So low tech, I totally agree, is best. And so if I go back to the point I was making about long term is key for if you want to gauge recruitment trends. Our site on the Roding, this is the data from that site. The grey line is the recruitment index. So every year, ICES, a group of scientists led by ICES, set up as the working group on eel, assess data from, there's 43 or so, 40 main data sets from across Europe, and lots of supplementary data, so long-term data sets on eel recruitment. Our data from this site also goes as supplementary data. So you can see the grey line is their recruitment index, and the bar chart below is our catches from the Roding. So just bearing in mind, set this in context of what Andrew was talking about, that we're still at that less than 10% recruitment level, very, very low recruitment level. But you do get this interannual variation, completely normal. And what we see at our trap sites is what we see across Europe, generally. Normally, for our recruitment sites. At other sites, these are the sorts of processes we go through. We trap, so this is on the River Crane in West London, it doesn't really particularly matter where it is, but this is just an example of the sort of process, the projects that we have been going through. So we trap on a catchment, and depending on what the trap data tells us, so in this instance, 0 catches, you can see 2011 to 2013. It's remarkable. 3 years these volunteers came to the trap during the summer months, didn't see a single eel, but it didn't whet their appetite. There was always that potential they might, but they didn't. But what they gave us was the evidence we needed to apply for funding to put passes in. Oh my word, 5 minutes. I've been waffling. So then we go and survey this downstream river, and sure enough, it's generally big barriers that are causing the problem. So we build passes, and then we start to see the recruitment into catchments. So these local wins are so important and so exciting for the communities. And time will tell whether we're really going to have a big impact across the Thames River Basin. Other times, yeah, let's go for that method. Oh, I should stress, this is our replicating what you were saying, Jack. This is our low-tech version of your habitat traps. We're using these much more now rather than the kind of chunky traps, to be technical about it, in rivers. We use these habitat traps, multiple sites. So we have master students every year. We can put them at multiple sites up river catchments, and they show the catches. If you have enough of them, a number of replicates is the important thing when you're using these low-tech traps. If you have enough of them, you can see the impact of barriers up rivers. And this project we certainly did on the River Brent. And now we're using those habitat traps to look at migration into the marginal habitat in the Thames. So important, all those marshes that have been cut off by flood defences. You can use them upstream, downstream. Simple, but effective and great for community science. Another approach we have to river catchments is, of course, based within the EA data. We can see sites, eel distribution within catchments receding back to the mouths of rivers. So we work collaboratively within partnerships to survey the rivers, to identify the key barriers and build passes. And the sorts of passes we're building now, they're metal channels essentially, generally. They are low tech. Gravity is always best. In our sort of constrained, flashy rivers, these do the job very well. I just want to talk about the other way that we work with citizen scientists. I'm not sure Anna's in the room. I don't want to dwell on this much because Anna Forbes from the Thames Rivers Trust is going to be talking about this shortly. But we still don't know where all the barriers are, even in the Thames River Basin. And we don't know the impact of all these barriers. So we've been working over the last 5-6 years to improve the way we assess passability of structures for eels. So we've produced a tool, the Ebat, the Eel Barrier Assessment Tool. It's available on our website, and it's just a quick field guide to using the height of structures, the shape of structures, the velocity of the water, whether there's crawling media, you can score the structure. And we've been working with the Environment Agency in England to embed that within the River Obstacles app. So we want to get more people out doing systematic surveys and gathering data on barriers to eel. And the methodology that we've developed collaboratively within, that Anna's going to be talking about, is called Obstacle-Eels, of course. So just to finish up, I just want to show you that I've talked about these local good news stories for eel that we need. You know, the trapping that we do demonstrates the impact of the conservation work that organisations like the Rivers Trust and whoever are doing. We see that over time. You know, time is the key, long-term monitoring, if you want to evidence the impact. So on the River Cray there, that was a particularly good one. Again, 0 catches or next to 0 catches. Environment Agency put in passes, we put in passes that reconnect the rivers, and then we start to see the eels being caught and moving through. Very important. So I said, you know, we've trained 1,200 or so volunteers since we started working with citizen scientists, and very important to feedback, to develop that sense of community. I'm not saying anything new and exciting here, I know. And some of those volunteers stay with us year on year. So we analyse the records from our volunteers, and we can see that sort of 3 or 4% of them have stayed all the way through, have become eel obsessives, like everybody in this room, which is absolutely fantastic. And that's building capacity, isn't it, for conservation work in the future. So I don't think I need to tell you any of this, because Jack's told you this before. Fantastic way, gathering loads of data across a large geographic area. And what we found particularly helpful is a fantastic way, working with citizen scientists, is a fantastic way of engaging stakeholders in what we need to do. And just to finish up, I want to put this into context of what's going on, certainly in England, in environmental monitoring. You know, we've got you've started this conference talking about the crisis we're in. Massive need to scale up action, massive need to scale up monitoring. At the same time, statutory agencies are under the cosh and they're no longer able to monitor in the way they used to. Citizen science has a role. It mustn't sort of precipitate the retreat of statutory monitoring. We need that statutory monitoring. But it has a role to play in monitoring the natural world. And in England, the Rivers Trusts, well, presumably you're impacted by this as well, have just won £7 million through the Ofwat Innovation Fund to, as they say, try to create a step change in citizen science, to standardise methods of citizen science for environments, for river monitoring. And we're working within this big partnership of organisations that they put together to deliver this. And I hope we're going to be championing eel and other fisheries monitoring within that framework. It's a very important new initiative within the world of citizen science. And the key for eel is long-term monitoring at sites, and then within catchments, systematic monitoring of multiple sites to give us information as to what's impacting movement upstream, generally barriers, as we know. So that's it. Thank you very much for listening. Those are our funders, and maybe questions later, is that right? Yeah.